Now, as we know about the story of Nehemiah, the Jews, of course, had been carried off into Babylon. They had been slaves, they had been captives. But as the Babylonians fell to the Medo-Persians, then the Persians allowed them to go back to Israel. They said, you can go back to your home. They'd gone back several years later, but they hadn't really done much there. Everything was still kind of a mess. Nehemiah got word of the trouble that they were in, and he got a burden and started praying, and the king actually allowed him to go back, financed his trip. Nehemiah goes back, and they've had a great deal of success. He's got the people together. He's rallied them together. They had a mind to work. They had overcome opposition from the outside because the local governors didn't want them there. You know, the Persian authorities who were there said, we don't want these Jews to be, get too much power, get too strong. So, but they'd overcome that. They'd dealt with threats from these people. They had dealt with division and sin among their own people. If you got last week, I really enjoyed last week's study. If you can go back and check it out, if you didn't get to hear it, it was how that the Jews were fighting among themselves. There was a rich group that was taking advantage of this other group and putting them into debt, and they were all in bondage and they couldn't get along. And Nehemiah comes in as a type of Christ, and he pays the debt of these people. He demands these other folks to let them go and not hold this over their heads. And they were able to be unified finally, because it was a situation where their indebtedness and their discouragement was getting them into a place where they couldn't do anything. Have you ever been like that? Have you ever been in so much debt that you just couldn't do anything? Or you were so discouraged about your life and you think, I can't even do what God wants me to do right now. I'm so burdened down and defeated. Well, they'd overcome all this, but now it seems that the enemy is wanting to play nice. Okay, the enemy is wanting to come on and cooperate with them. And we have to be very, very careful, because Jesus himself said, beware when all men speak well of you. Right? He said, that's the way they did the false prophets before you. They would, blow these guys up and say, oh, they're so great. Well, you need to be careful here. So let's look at verse 1. It says, now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors and the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me harm. Now, this is what happens. Whenever we're doing well in the Lord, and these guys were doing well, right? The wall was built, everybody's getting along, they were getting out of debt, they've got a mind to work, that the enemy sees their progress. And the enemy sees your progress. Maybe you've overcome some things in your life. Maybe you finally decided, to get serious about your walk with the Lord, or maybe you've overcome some things, and the enemy spots that. And when he sees that, he will come against us. If we notice, when Jesus began his ministry, he's baptized. This dove comes down on him as a sign. John the Baptist presents him as the Lamb of God. He begins his ministry. The voice comes from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And Jesus is on, right? And as soon as he's on and ready to go, he goes into the wilderness and he's tempted by the devil. And the devil offers him all these things. Offers him, riches. Offers him, to feed his flesh with the food. Offered him, to be impressive and cast himself off the temple. So when the enemy sees our success, he will often react. And he will try to trip us up, okay? And sometimes when he does that, it's not always some big scary thing that he comes with. It's not like this blatant, open, he doesn't come with, fire breathing out of his nose and a pitchfork and, little demon bats flying around or anything. It can often be something very smooth, very subtle, very attractive, okay? And the scripture tells us that he comes as an angel of light sometimes, okay? But Peter knew a thing or two about spiritual attack, wouldn't you say? Jesus said to Peter, he said that the devil seeks to sift you like wheat. He desires you, and he wants to sift you like wheat, So Peter knew about some spiritual attack. And later on in Peter's life, he writes in his first epistle, he tells the believers, be sober, be vigilant. That means watch, pay attention, like you're on like a vigil. Be sober, be alert, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world. So here these guys in Jerusalem, and it says the wall was not yet finished, okay? It said they had rebuilt the wall and there were no breaks in it. They didn't have the gates, the doors up yet. but they were well on their way. They were doing really, really well, okay? And they weren't yet where they wanted to be, but they were much farther along than they were. And you know, sometimes we forget how far we've come. And sometimes we do really need to stop and count the blessings. And we need to stop and say, well, at least I'm not where I was 10 years ago or 5 years ago or before the Lord found me, you know. And probably nobody in this room, your life is exactly like you would want it to be. I know mine's not. There's several things I'd like to see change or different. But at the same time, you need to look at where you are. That you are in a good place. You're with the Lord. You know you're saved. You know you're progressing. You're in a good Christian fellowship. You have friends that support you. God is showing you your gifts. He's allowing you to discover ways that you can make yourself useful. So even though you're not where you want to be yet, you're probably a whole lot better off than you think you are. You're much further along than you realize. So the enemy, he comes to these guys and he wants to bargain. He says, come, let us meet together in the villages in the plain of Ono. And they said, oh no, Yoko, we're not going there. So these guys wanted to negotiate. They wanted to bargain. You know, a bargain usually involves something that we think we want or we think we need. You know, you go to buy a car and they go, oh, this one's marked down. And they tell you, oh, this one's on sale. You know, and that salesperson, he's in there and he knows you want it or whatever it is. He knows you need that thing or you want that thing. So he's playing to your desires, you see. He knew Nehemiah wanted peace. He knew Nehemiah wanted peace. Nehemiah, he didn't want to have to be dealing with threats all the time. There was something that he saw, something that he felt like they needed. And he said, you know, if you'll just work with us, things will be better for you. And sometimes the enemy comes to us and says, you know, if you'll just work with me, if you'll just compromise just a little bit, you won't be so lonely. You won't struggle so much. You won't have to worry about finances. You know, you can get promoted at work or whatever if you'll just compromise a little bit. Now, you have to remember that the enemy is never out to help us. Yes, you want to be able to get along with people at work. Yes, you want to get your finances under control. Yes, you don't want to be lonely. But the enemy is not out to help you. He's not out to bless you. He's out to distract you. Just like he offered Jesus all these things in the wilderness. He was trying to get Jesus' eyes and his mind off of his purpose and his focus. So look at verse 3. This is probably one of the key verses in the book of Nehemiah. It says, so I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? He wouldn't go to them. He sent messengers back to them. And you know, probably people were saying, hey man, these are important guys. They're finally willing to work with you. You know, they're finally willing to work a deal. Let's see what they have to offer. He probably had some people on his team saying that. Hey, this might be what we've been waiting on. You know, they finally wised up. They're finally come to their senses. They're reasonable. But Nehemiah says, no. He says, I am not going to do this. Nehemiah looked at his present situation with God, and even though he hadn't yet reached the goal, things weren't finished yet, you know what he said? I am doing a great work. I am doing a great work. You are doing a great work now. You don't have to wait till later. You don't have to wait till you get that great career break, or you get married someday, or you finally, reach that apex of success, whatever you think it is, or realize your dreams. You are doing a great work now, right now. Taking care of those kids is a great work right now. It is. It's a great work, and nobody else can do it but you. Your position in the family, your position in this church, your role at work, you are doing a great work now. And sometimes we don't look at it that way. We feel like what we're doing is not really that important, We say, well, yeah, but I'm not there yet. He could have said, yeah, but we don't have somebody could have said, yeah, but we don't have the gates up there. But we don't have this, we don't have this. He said, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. I remember one time years ago, we were back there in this little hall moving chairs. And we used to have to move chairs every week. Some of you guys don't know that. And I said something about, we're just a small church. And Augustino back here says, this is not a small church. This is a very important church. I said, you know what? You're right. And I was busted. Because sometimes we think, we forget. I mean, if we don't do our work and don't do our job, regardless of what it is, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it if you don't do it? God has put each one of us into a place that no one else can fit. Nobody else can do the role that you are doing. And you might think that's true, but it's not true. There's a great verse I love in 1 Peter, and it says that we are built together as living stones, being built into the temple of God. I'm giving a paraphrase, but it's in 1 Peter chapter 2. And the word that's used there for stone, I've told this example before, but it's so important to me. It's the word lithos in the Greek. And the word lithos means a stone that is cut by a stonemason to fit into a particular spot. If you ever see pictures of walls or buildings in the Middle East, they put whatever stones they can find and they cut them to fit, and then none of them are the same. You can look at this wall, look at this cinder block. They were all made with a machine. They were all stamped out. If you've ever seen cinder blocks being made, and I have, that they're all identical. But God's body is not like that. The church is not like that. You have a role nobody else can fit. You have a role nobody else can fill. I can't fulfill your role. You can't fulfill his role or her role. God has made you unique to fit into your place. And if we don't do the work that God is giving us to do right now, just like he said, I can't come down from this. If I come down to talk to you guys, and you don't have my best interest in place to begin with, the work that I'm doing will stop. Okay? So we have to remember that the work that God has given each one of us to do is so important. We are doing God's work, a great work, right now, and we cannot lower ourselves to come down from it. You realize, when I was studying on this, is something I've never seen before, and I've been through this study a few times with a couple of different teachers, and it made me think of? Let me think of Jesus on the cross. And what did they say to him? Save yourself and us. Come down from the cross. Come down from there. Stop what you're doing. And Jesus can do that. And they said, he saved others. Himself he cannot save. Right? And the irony of that statement is that he couldn't save himself and save us too. He gave himself, he sacrificed himself so that we could be saved. So the work that you're doing is just not so somebody can come along and give you a pat on the back and say, attaboy, great job. That was really cool. No, it's because the work that you and I are doing is always ministering to someone else. And we can all think probably back if you had decent parents, you can think about maybe they were hard workers and maybe they sacrificed and did without or whatever so that you could have things and you could go to school or you could have stuff and, that they didn't get to have. And think of it in the same way. God has put you in a situation that you serve and you work, and it's for the benefit of other people. Nehemiah wasn't doing this so he could look good. In fact, we saw in the last chapter, he was taking money out of his own pocket to pay people's debts and feed folks and everything else, and refused to take the wages from the governor. He wasn't in it for him. He wasn't in it to look good. He was doing this because there was a God-ordained work that he had to do, and he knew that if he didn't do it, no one else could do it. Troy Warner is a friend of mine. Some of you guys know him. He's a pastor in Lynchburg, Virginia. He's been out there about 30 years now, I think, or more than 30 years. And we were at a pastor's meeting one time, and Troy said this. He said, don't ever stop doing what only you can do in order to go do something that anybody else could do. And he was talking to a group of pastors, and I'm going to use this pastor's example as just to kind of explain what he said. He said, let's say, you got a truckload comes in, right? Or the carpet needs to be cleaned or something. And the pastor is neglecting his study time, and he's neglecting his prayer time, and he's neglecting the hospital visitation because he's over here cleaning the carpet and unloading the truck. When anybody can clean the carpet or unload the truck, but not anybody in the church can be the pastor. And some of you guys, not anybody can be the dad in your house. You're the dad in your house. Not anybody can be the mom of that baby. You're the mom of that baby. You know, so you have a role. Even at your work, you're the leader. You're the supervisor. You're the teacher. You're the manager. You're the one. And sometimes it's easy for us to think, they can get anybody. They'll have my job application online before I have my exit interview finished, you know. And that might be true. But still, you and I have a role, even just our personality and our gifts with our friends, with our family. We have an influence with them. They're looking for us. Listen, even the people that give you a hard time and maybe rib you about your faith, they still expect you to be holy. They expect you to be true. They want you to be faithful, even if they might be giving you a hard time about it. They know that if they get in a pinch and they get in a bind and they're having a problem, you're the one they're going to call. You're the one that they're going to look to. Okay? So you stay true to what God has given you to do. Don't come down from it, okay? God has given you a position. Don't sacrifice that God has given you to go do something else. Philip Brooks wrote, if a man is called to preach, don't stoop to be a king. If you're called to preach, don't stoop to be a king. I know pastors, and even myself, people come to me, and they want me to get involved in some kind of business adventure with them. I don't have time to get into a business adventure with people. I have guys come and they want me to join their band. I don't have time to get in their band. I'm on a wall. I'm on God's wall. I'm doing a great work. I can't do this to go get involved in some business with somebody that might not even work. You know, I can't do it. And I don't say that to puff myself up. I'm just saying we have to be focused, guys. We have to be focused. We have to be focused. I heard a great quote. Some of you guys saw it too. My son actually posted it online and made me think of this. That if we're going to reach the world, it won't be with our spare time. And it won't be with our spare money. There has to be some deliberate effort and focus with what we have and God has given us to be true to the calling that He's given us. Let's move this on, okay? Verse 4 says, but they sent this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. You know, the enemy's relentless. He doesn't give up. He doesn't just leave you alone. He might go on for years and years and years. If you've ever read C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, there's a book called Paralandra, and it's a kind of a parable of the Garden of Eden, and the enemy comes in and is tempting the mother figure, like the Eve in this story. It's a Christian book. And the enemy comes in and he's tempting and tempting. And you know, when you read the book of Genesis, you know, you think, well, that just happened in one afternoon. But in his book, it goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And sometimes, you know, Paul gives us a great verse there in Corinthians where he says that these light afflictions, which are but for a moment, are not worthy to be compared to the exceeding weight of glory that we're going to experience with God. And sometimes the temptations we go through, they don't seem light and they don't seem like they're for a moment. Sometimes they go on for years, don't they? And you might be dealing with the same thing for years and years and years. And you think it's going to kill you. And you think it's going to destroy you. And you get absolutely depressed and frustrated and anxious about it. But God will deliver you. You just have to stay true. Here's an example. It says that these guys came back 4 times. It wasn't just an attack. This was flattery. This was temptation. This was opportunity. But Nehemiah was steadfast. And sometimes those temptations, they look good. They make sense. You go home and talk with your wife and say, well, maybe I should think about this, you know. And she's going, well, I don't know, you know. And I go, well, yeah, but, you know, I mean, we could make a lot of money here. We could get out of this, or, you know. And it always looks good. And I'm sure that what these guys, they were thinking about this. They had a sweet deal for Nehemiah. They were going to give him an offer that he couldn't refuse. You know what I'm saying? They thought this thing through. These were not foolish men. I mean, they were foolish as far as God's wisdom goes, but these were leaders and governors. These were manipulators and politicians. They were saying, how can we get to this guy? We're going to give him a really sweet deal. And they kept at it and kept at it. But Nehemiah stood steadfast. He didn't change his answer. Then Sambalat, verse 5, sent his servant to me as before, the 5th time with an open letter in his hand. And in it was written, now he's got the accusation, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem says, that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Oh my goodness, a political revolt, an uprising. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall that you may be their king. See, Israel hadn't had a king in a long time. They hadn't had a king in well over 100 years. So there was no king in Israel. I mean, they were subservient to the powers that be. Here, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Medo-Persians, and after that the Greeks, and after that the Romans, when Jesus and John the Baptist came around. So they didn't have a king. These people were refugees. They were outcasts, okay? And he says, you guys are trying to, you just want to be their king, verse 7, and you have also appointed prophets to have proclaimed concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king. So come, therefore, and let us consult together. Now, he's bringing a formal complaint. Now, it's one thing for the people at work to fuss about you, isn't it? It's one thing for them to fuss about you. But if you get called into HR, anybody ever had to deal with that? You ever have to go talk to your manager or your supervisor, and they say, they get these forms laid out on the desk, and you're like, great. And your heart starts beating, and you feel like you've been called to the principal's office when you were 7. Remember that feeling of terror, that you don't know what's going to happen because you got called. That probably never happened to y'all. It happened to me more than once when I was a kid. I was one of those kids that always got called to the principal's office. But this was a formal complaint now. He's got a letter in his hand, and he said, this is formal. This is serious now. This guy wasn't just an adversary. He wasn't just a troublemaker and a nuisance. He was the governor. He could make serious problems, especially if he could prove that these things were true. What? You want to be a king? What? You want to get these people together and have a revolt, have a rebellion on your hands? And you've sent prophets out among the people saying, there's a king, there's a king. Well, none of this was true. What did this man expect out of Nehemiah? A bribe? A compromise? Why would Nehemiah want to go and negotiate with these people to begin with? Why would this man, if he really thought Nehemiah was a rebel and a traitor and a troublemaker, why would he go in and try to make a deal with him? Why negotiate with terrorists, as they say? Why would he go and say, well, hey, we'll work a deal. We know you're in trouble, but we'll work a deal. If he was really believed all this, he would have dealt with it otherwise. But Nehemiah, verse 8, said to him, saying, you know such things as you were say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. The Bible talks about people who are inventors of evil things. They just come up with their own ideas about wickedness to accuse other people about. Verse 9, for they were all trying to make us afraid. There's the motive. There's the enemy's tool. Make us afraid, saying their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Nehemiah is recognizing the true nature of the attack. The enemy wants him to be afraid. The enemy wants you to be afraid. He wants you to think it's not going to work. He just wants you to think they're going to fire me, or my marriage is not going to work out, or I'm going to get a bad report back from the doctor, or this doesn't look good, or I'm going to lose my shirt, or I'm going to go bankrupt, or God doesn't like me. And the enemy will come incessantly with these attacks, just like he did here. But Nehemiah recognized that none of this was true, and he said, they're just trying to make us weak so that we can't do the work. The enemy just wants to disable you. That's all he wants to do. He wants to sideline you. If he can just get you to just back out of the game, go sit on the sideline. Just give up. Say, well, I'll just go to church, but I'm not going to get active. I'm not going to get so serious. I'm not going to be one of those religious fanatics, who's fasting and praying and going to Bible studies and prayer meetings all the time and trying to convert people. I don't want to be one of those guys. Well, isn't that what they were like in the Bible? You see, but the enemy tells you, just chill out. Just don't be so fanatical. I've had people say that to me, when I was a young Christian, just don't be one of those fanatics. Well, I didn't know what a fanatic was, but I just knew I'd been saved. Now therefore, look at verse 9. He says, now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. I love how it interspersed throughout this story, because you've got to remember, Nehemiah wrote this, and he writes a lot of it in first person. This is like his journal. Quentin mentioned the journal a while ago. He's putting his own thoughts into here. And he says, God, strengthen my hands. Okay? Notice here, he's not asking for punishment on the wicked. One of the things that has really kind of grieved me in the last several years, really, with all the political turmoil and all the with all the masks and all the vaccines and the mandates and the elections and all this kind of things that have gone on and on and on over them, is how I've seen so many people who are Christians and claim to be Christians, and they're pronouncing such evil on unbelievers. Have you seen that? They're pronouncing so much evil on people that they disagree with. And they get online and say all kinds of things that shouldn't be said. And you know, here's an example of a godly man. He's being accused, he's being attacked, he's being threatened for his life. And he doesn't do any of that stuff. He said, strengthen my hands. Strengthen my hands. Don't let that fear stop me. Don't let these accusations worry me. Don't let me go and compromise with these guys that are trying to make a deal. Strengthen my hands. Make me strong. Help me finish the work. One of the things that I love about Jesus, when you look at that prayer of his in John 17, the last night he was on the earth before he was crucified, and Jesus said, I have finished the work. I have finished the work that you gave me to do. And a lot of us, and Jesus talks about this. He talks about the seed on the rock. But he talks about the man who started the tower and didn't finish it. A lot of us start out and we give up. How many of you see these young, zealous Christians, and I see them today, and they're like college students, and they're just on fire for the Lord, and they want to go to Nicaragua. They go on mission trips, and they're just so on fire. And you see somebody in their 40 or 50 years, 60 years old, and they go, well, you know, you guys need to calm down a little bit and not be so radical. The enemy doesn't want us to be successful for the Lord. But Nehemiah here is praying, strengthen my hands, help me to finish what you've given me to do. Now afterwards, verse 10, moving along here, Nehemiah comes to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Eliah. I'm butchering all these names, I know. The son of Mehethabel, who was a secret informer. This guy was in the know. This guy knew what was going on. He was like a... when I lived in West Virginia, there was this guy, and I don't know, I guess he didn't have a car or whatever, and he walked all over town. You'd go out, you'd come back, and you'd see him walking by the hospital. You'd see him walking by the courthouse. You'd see him walking to Walmart. And this guy was always on foot, all the time. And you know, whenever something was going on in town, and the cops wanted to know if anybody had seen anything, you know who they went to? This guy. Because he walked every day all over town, and they'd take him and say, hey, have you seen anything? You didn't see a blue Camaro come through here, did you? You know, about 3 o'clock. Well, yeah. He saw it. He knew everything that was going on. This guy here was a secret informer in our story. He knew what was going on. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple. Oh, now he's going religion. How many people try to use religion on this, right? He said, let us go there. Let us close the doors, and we'll hide in there, for they're coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you. Now, this guy, he had his theories, he had his schemes, he had his plans. It was all based on threats, and again, it was fear as a motivator. We want to make you afraid, Nehemiah. They're coming tonight. And what you need to do is you need to go to the temple and shut the doors. You need to hide behind God. That's a handy one, isn't it? A lot of people hide behind God. You know, they go to church so everybody thinks they're behaving themselves. Or they'll say, well, if I'm religious, nothing can get to me, you know. But Nehemiah said, look, should such a man as I flee? And who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. He said, I'm not a coward. I don't run from trouble. And I hate to say it, I don't think there's just enough courage sometimes among believers. Just courage, bravery. We don't have to be obnoxious and get out here and try to pick fights with people. That's not what I'm saying. Because that's a sin, and that's an offense, and that stumbles a lot of people. But we can't be afraid of the fact that Jesus said, you're going to meet some opposition. You're going to be hated by all men for my name's sake. Not everybody's going to love it. Just like we saw in that clip, that girl quitting that job. Not everybody thought this is awesome. Some of your family or your workplace or your relatives, they're not going to think it's awesome when you decide you're going to follow the Lord. But you can't run away from that. You can't run away from that trouble. And you can't just go hide behind religion. He says, I'm not a coward. I don't run from trouble. And you know, we just saw in our Wednesday night study over the last couple of weeks, and if you guys haven't been coming to Wednesday night, I think anybody who attends will tell you that it's really worth coming out. It's a great, it's open discussion too. But what we saw two guys in that story in 2 weeks. We saw Adoniah and Joab. Remember, they both ran to the tabernacle and they hung on the horns of the altar. Remember that? Both of those guys were hanging on the horns of the altar because they thought, if I do this, they can't get me, they can't touch me, you know. And sometimes, I think, just like this man is tempting Nehemiah, sometimes we kind of superstitiously think that if we can impress people with religion, that nothing will get to us. But Nehemiah wasn't buying any of this. He said, I'm not going to run away, and I'm certainly not going to run into the temple. That's not the kind of man I am. I'm not this kind of guy. I'm not going to run from trouble. I'm not going to do it. Then, look at verse 12, I perceived God is giving him insight, giving him like a word of knowledge, so to speak, a word of wisdom. I perceived that God had not sent him at all. This was one of the Jews, but that he had pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Money talks, doesn't it? Dylan said money doesn't talk, it swears. But they hired this guy. They bribed him. Okay? And, you know, it reminds us of when Jesus was arrested and accused. And it said nobody could get their story straight, right? But it says, in the King James, it says, but they suborned men. You guys ever noticed that word? If you've ever read the old King James Bible, which is all I ever had when I was growing up, it says they suborned men. And that word suborn means they literally bribed them. They paid them to say what they're supposed to say. Just like this story, we watched that movie Risen a few months ago. We might show it again at Easter. It's a great movie. And how that the guards at the tomb, remember? And the priest paid them off. Said, you tell them this. You tell them that the disciples came and stole his body. And they paid them off. They bribed them, right? Just like the witnesses against Jesus. They bribed them. So Nehemiah said, I figured it out that this guy had been hired by these people. For this reason he was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way and sin. Sin. It's a sin. You know, I think it's over in Revelation 21, where it talks about all these people that are cast out of the kingdom. And it mentions the fearful and the unbeliever. It's a sin. It's a sin to be fearful. Now, there are things, I'm just being honest with you guys. I watch the same news you guys watch. Well, probably not the same news, but some of it. And because I can't take much of it. But, you know, you watch some of this stuff, and you do get afraid. And you worry. And you worry about the economy. And you worry about COVID. And you worry about governments. And you worry about foreign governments and people that have nuclear capabilities. And you worry about terrorists in our country. And you worry about crime and violence, right? You know, in your own city, in your own neighborhood. And it's easy to be fearful about things. And we're human. And there's a part of us that we want to stay safe, and we want our families to be safe. But we can never allow fear to cause us to disobey God. You can't do that. And I'll be the first person to tell you, I don't want no trouble. Okay? I'm not looking for trouble. I'm not going to go out here and pick a fight with somebody. I'm not going to do it. You know, I want to be a mellow fellow, we used to say. You know, I want to get along with people. But there are times when the enemy will come against us, and we can't just run away. We can't be afraid, because it is a sin to drop what we're doing and go and run away from what God has called us to do. So now here's a prayer, another prayer, verse 14. And he says, my God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these their works, and the prophetess Noadiah, as first mentioned, and the reason of the prophets who would have made me afraid. Now here, he is appealing to God, and he's saying, I want you to remember that these people are coming against your work. They're coming against your work. It's not so much against him personally, because he said, if I stop this, the work will stop. The work was stopped. I mean, look, they could have offered him a cushy deal and sent him to live on some island somewhere, and he wouldn't even have to go back and report to the king of Persia or anything else. You know, they could have just said, hey, man, just get out of our hair and go away. You know? But he said, if I come down from the wall, the work will stop. And if you come down, if you leave, and we all get tempted, somebody might be tempted watching this, you might be tempted to walk out on your family. Some of you may be willing to be tempted to walk out on your friends, or to leave your church, or give up on God altogether, or give up on this ministry and say it's not working, it's not happening. I don't see any fruit. I haven't gotten where I want to be yet. But even though Nehemiah had not hung the doors yet, and they weren't quite finished, he said, I am doing a great work, and I will not come down from here. And that's why he prayed against these guys. It wasn't because he wanted them to, be destroyed, die, and go to hell, perish and suffer and all this kind of thing. He said, these guys are coming against your work, Lord. And you see it, Lord, I want you to remember it. Just remember it. He didn't ask, look, no curses on them, nothing. He just said, God, remember what they're doing. Remember their works. Remember what they're doing. So, the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. Okay, that's pretty good. Then you say, well, we built the wall. How long did it take us to build this wall here? All together? 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days, okay? And that's just, that's pine nailed up, okay? I want you to think about this. 6 weeks, okay, 7 weeks, these men built a wall 2.5 miles long. 2.5 miles long. 40 feet high. 40 feet. Now, this room is 10 feet. 12 feet. 12 feet to the okay? So, 3 or 4 times this high. Think of that. 2.5 miles long and 8 feet thick. And they did it in 2 months. 2.5 miles. 4 times the height of this room. And 8 feet thick. And they did. Because they had a mind to work. This was a tremendous task. And sometimes you might look at something that you're doing, and you might even be thinking about, raising a child for the next 18 years, You may think about, if somebody's listening to this and or some of our students, and you think you're never going to get through that program, especially if it's a graduate program. Or you might be in the military, or you might be somewhere and you think, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to get this done. I don't know, or maybe you've been married for 10 or 20 or 40 years like me, and you're like, I want to finish this thing out, I want to do well, I want to live well. But God gave these people the strength. They had a mind to do it. They had made up their minds, we are going to do this. And they had opposition. They had attacks. They had compromise. They had flattery. They had everything trying to just say, stop, just don't do it. Anything but the wall. Anything but. And they said, no, we're going to stay with it. And they did. Verse 16 says, and it happened when all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was done by God. When God is accomplishing a work, not everyone gets excited, as we've already mentioned. Some people get angry. Some people are afraid. Others lose heart altogether, knowing that they cannot win against God. They just can't win against God. I love it when you read the Gospels and you read in the book of Acts, and it says that they sent people to arrest Jesus. And these officers came back to their superiors, and they said, well, why didn't you arrest him? Where is he? Why didn't you bring him back? And the officer said, no man ever spoke like this man. We couldn't bring ourselves to arrest him. You got to hear this guy. Nobody ever spoke like this man. Or when the disciples were arrested, and one of the Jewish leaders, I think it was Gamaliel actually, who stood up in the Sanhedrin and says, look, if this thing is of God, we can't fight it. We can't fight it. And when we're steadfast, and we stay true, and God actually does start to accomplish things, and things actually do start to happen, then the unbelievers on the outside look at it, And they realized this is a work of God. And that's when often their own hearts get convicted. I mean, look at Saul. Saul stood there and held their clothes while they stoned Stephen to death. And later on, when Jesus appeared to him, and Jesus said, Saul, it is hard for you to kick against the goats. It's hard for you to kick against the pricks. It's because he watched Stephen glorify the Lord. He watched these faithful believers being willing to be cast into prison. And it was working on his own heart. Saul the persecutor had letters from Jerusalem. He was going to other towns, Damascus and everywhere, drag these people out. But his heart had been softened and his heart had been convicted. And it was hard for him to keep resisting. And Jesus even said, it's hard for you to keep doing this. Why? Because you see the power of the gospel in other people's lives. And that's what we want to be. You and I want to be those believers that despite the persecution, despite the resistance, the flattery, the compromise, all these things like Nehemiah was going through, that we go through these things and people look at your life and they see the power of God working in you, and it convicts their own hearts. Not that they might be ashamed, but that they might be healed. And like Saul, they come in and say, what do you have to do, Lord? And you know, people see it. And sometimes it takes years. And they'll come around and they'll say, I've always watched you. And I've always admired you. And I've always seen how you've been faithful in God's work in your life. There's not a person in this room that's perfect. There's not a person in this room that had made somebody mad, made a mistake, blew your stack, you got mad, right? I'll raise my hand first, right? That we all make our mistakes. But at the same time, when we stay at it, we're consistent, then the people around us, they watch and they see and they know that despite the fact that we're not perfect, God is working. God is working in every one of our hearts, lives, and lives. The last little vignette here that happens is really interesting at the end of the chapter here. It says, also in those days, the nobles of Judah. Now, these are the nobles of Judah. These are the Jews. These are the important guys. Remember these fellows? These were some of the ones that were putting everybody into debt earlier. Also, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. So they're corresponding with the enemy. Think about that. Sometimes the best thing you need to do, if somebody you know they're bad for you, avoid them. You don't have to be mean to them. But don't go hang out with them. If you know they're just going to mess you up, don't go hang out with them. I just saw that verse that popped up yesterday that says that evil communications corrupt good manners, or evil associations, it says in other translations. You hang out with the wrong people and you start acting like them. When you were little, did you ever hang out with a bad kid and start acting like that bad kid? Just me. Okay. And maybe you hung out with some other kid that got you in trouble, right? Right? You can relate. Right? And you were hanging out with a bad kid, the wrong kid, and then the next thing you know, you're doing the wrong stuff. Well, these Jews were corresponding with Tobiah. They're sending these letters back and forth, and they're just having a chummy time. They're just getting along. And for many in Judah were pledged to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son Jehonadab had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Now they're doing exactly what God said not to do. When you go into Promised Land, he said, don't marry in with these tribes. And it wasn't a racist thing. It wasn't some kind of prejudice thing. He said, if you go and you marry, you give your daughters to those people, and you take their daughters for your sons, there's going to be compromise. You're going to learn their evil ways. You're going to start doing what they do, living like they do, and it's going to have an influence. So here we see another example of where these people living in the land, God had allowed them to go all the way back, and still they're breaking the very law of God. Don't marry in with these people because it's going to be trouble. And again, this was not a racist thing. This is not a prejudice thing. God was trying to preserve the integrity of the culture of the Jews here. So these people had married in, and it says that many of them were pledged to him. You know what it means to pledge to him? It means they volunteered. They went in and signed up and said, I want to be your man. I want to make a deal. You can count on me. This wasn't something that they'd been forced to do, okay? They were pledging themselves willingly to this man. And remember, this very man, you go back to the previous chapters, this man had opposed Nehemiah. He had mocked Nehemiah. He had plotted murder against Nehemiah. And what are these fellows doing? Oh, they're making deals and pledging themselves to him. Now that's sad. And you say, well, what kind of fool would do that? We do it all day long sometimes in our culture. We go and we make deals with people that don't love the Lord. We make promises to people that don't have no interest in hearing from God. We go and we listen, and I know this is a big thing, but sometimes people will listen to anybody just because they're conservative, okay? And you go and listen to some of these conservative speakers and pundits, and that they have zero interest in Jesus Christ. I'm going to tell you that right now. They're just politically or fiscally conservative. So people go, oh, I like what he has to say. Yeah, but the guy he's not speaking from the Holy Spirit. We have to be careful. Same on the other side. Yeah, but these people, they want to take it for the poor. They want to hold up for equality. They want to, help the minorities. But they're not listening to the Holy Spirit. And we kind of pledge ourselves and align ourselves with all these people that really have zero interest in God. And we're pledging ourselves to them, so to speak. So, these people, who had pledged themselves to Tobiah, they were obligated by politics, by family relationships, by political deals. It's interesting to me, and I'm not trying to get political, but I think it's very interesting when you look at sometimes at some of the politicians on both sides of the aisle, okay, and how many big business deals they're always making, or their brother-in-law, or their uncle, or their husband. And they've all got these financial deals that are going on. And they're just kind of getting rich off of stuff all the time. And foreign trade deals and all kinds of stuff. Well, this was what was happening here. This is nothing new. It was happening in the Bible times. So this man was married in, to them, and they were all pledging to him, and all these deals were going on. And look at verse 19. Also, they reported his good deeds before me, and reported my words to him, but Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. Now look, these men, they were Jews, and they were defending Tobiah. They were defending the enemy. Again, this is a man who had opposed, mocked, plotted, tried to tempt and bribe and bargain and all this kind of thing. And the Jews were coming around going, he's not so bad. He's done a lot of good things. Somebody was telling me about a preacher that they listened to. And the preacher, as far as I'm concerned, he's just false, But this person was saying, yeah, but he says a lot of good stuff. Well, anybody can say a lot of good stuff, but that's not the whole story. Yes, Tobiah had done some good things. He'd probably done a lot of things to try to, get on their good side, spend some money, look good. Hey, impress these people. Get them to like you, right? But that wasn't the whole story. And these people were blind because of their deals and they pledged to him and the relationships and the obligations. They were blind to the fact that this was a man who opposed the work of God. Yeah, he did some good things, but he only did it to get on the good side because he was opposed to the work of God, and he was trying to get them to trust him so he could get in on things. Now, I love this great quote here from David Guzik. He's a commentator that I really like to read. Has a website called The Enduring Word if you want to go look at his notes sometime, and you can find out where I steal stuff. But David Guzik says this: Nehemiah had work to do, and that work was not really going out to attack people like Tobiah. I like that. Nehemiah had work to do, and that work was not really going out to attack people like Tobiah. He could leave the Tobiahs alone as long as they weren't attacking the work of God. He's like, I've got other things to do. Don't worry about Tobiah. I'm not going to go negotiate with him. I'm not going to let you guys tell me how great he is. I'm not interested in Tobiah. I have work to do, and I'm not coming off the wall because I am doing the great work. You are doing the great work. Even if you think, well, what do? I come to church and kind of just hang out. Your presence, you have no idea how much it means excuse me, to the people that come to fellowship for you just to show up and say, I'm interested in the things of God, and I'm here to support you in your walk with God. That is not a small thing. That is not a small thing. Everything you do at work, it's not a small thing. It's a big thing. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are. Don't ever think you're not. And you are doing a great work.
Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments about today's teaching, or if you'd like to learn more about how to enter into a relationship with God through His Son, Jesus Christ, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us through our website at calvarychapelnashville.com. From our website, you can learn more about our ministry, and you can also hear more of Pastor Chris's verse-by-verse studies through the Bible. You can also subscribe on iTunes as well. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Until then, may the Lord bless you.